to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about The Long Game, written by Russell T Davies, and is directed by Brian Grant. For those of you who don't know, Brian Grant is a director mostly known for his music videos, specifically one music video, The Physical. You know, the let's get physical, physical. I wanna get physical. Let's get it together, baby. Let me hear your body talk. Yeah, the music video to that is directed by the same guy who directed The Long Game. That's a fact. You can look it up on the internet. That's just such a weird connection to two really opposite poles of one another of the run. This story is the first story since Dalek, where basically everything in Doctor Who has changed. We've gone from trying to set up the tone, the atmosphere of the new series, a new show of the revived series of Doctor Who, and then Dalek happened, and we now know where Doctor Who is. It's the boundary between children entertainment and adult entertainment. It's can tackle hard-hitting themes and can tackle more dark subject matter. It's also here that we have Adam Mitchell as a temporary companion. This would be his only other appearance outside of Dalek. And this story also sets up, even though it doesn't feel like a prequel. It doesn't constantly is right, we're going to return here, we're going to tease all of these things about all these mysteries and stuff. So I think this is actually a great time to talk about the story arc in the revived series. But this story is basically a setup to the finale, as it sets up the location, essentially the world, but the finale is building up to. So let's talk about, before we get into the actual story itself, story arcs, because there's something that New Who, every season apart from one of the seasons, season 11, with Jodie Whittaker and Chris Chibnall, has had in some way, shape or form a story arc, plot elements which follow on through other stories and then conclude in the final episode of the season. Majority of the time, in my opinion, they fail and use, and especially during the Stephen Moffat era, are really distracting elements which are constantly the writers, especially the showrunners, basically pointing to you and going, look, this stuff will be interesting later on. Keep your eyes peeled because you'll need to know this in the future, in the final episode. Who's this mysterious villain? Are the Daleks coming back? What's the pattern? What's the 4 knocks? What's the crack in time? Who's Missy? The hybrid? All that rubbish and stuff. But the first series of Doctor Who handled it perfectly, for two separate reasons. One, with the Bad Wolf meme, it was so subtle that in the stories that it appears, in fact, Bad Wolf appears again in this story as a part of a news channel. It's so subtle that it takes away no distractions from the story it's telling now. If somebody didn't tell you that, oh look, do you see that word Bad Wolf? Well, that's going to be a teaser for a later story. If nobody told you that, you could have happily lived without that information. It's the story it's telling at the moment, in the present, is the important aspect for the moment. And that is how stories, especially Doctor Who stories, which travel through space and time, and each adventure is set in its own location. That is how Doctor Who, in my opinion, should work. But we also got this story, which is much more of a setup than than just the bad wolf everywhere, as it sets up, like I said, the location and the world that the finale builds up upon. But here, it's never written in a way where it's constantly the writer teasing us. In fact, again, if this wasn't for the fact that we now know that the setting would be appearing in another story, you could happily live without it. You wouldn't watch this at the end of the story and go, well, I need to find out what happens next. How is all of this going to conclude? No, it concludes in the story it's telling, which is, again, it's perfect. It's just, that's how you should do a story arc, where each element is complementing the storyline that it's in, not distracting us, which will become a big problem in later seasons down the line. I will warn you, I might get a little bit ranty in those videos, but that's beside the point. Yeah, so that's really much of the build up to the story as I can really talk about. And yeah, I might have waffled on about story arcs, which is ironic because I'm distracting it from the story it's telling now. But there's a good reason for that. The long game just isn't an interesting story in and of itself. I'm glad, I am super happy by the fact that it didn't waste its time just building up for another story. I'm glad it tells its own story, and I would prefer that to any sort of Stephen Moffat's later Russell T Davies storylines in which like all this build up and stuff. But it still doesn't hide the fact that this isn't a particular good storyline. But I think let's start off with something I do like about this story in terms of its compliments. It's a story that fits the one-parter. A lot of stories in new series, I always feel like they would have been so much better if they were a 2 or even a 3-parter with the old format of usual 4-part stories and every episode being more than one gone out the window. It does mean that some stories feel like they don't get enough time, or they feel like actual episodes. Which Doctor Who, despite being a TV show that's lasted at this point just over 40 years, never had that issue. Like, each story felt like it could be its own movie in a sense. Maybe not a good movie, might not even be like an even interesting movie, but the storytelling and the way they build up and the way this format is, it could be a movie. Each story could be its movie. But this story, I feel like it can only exist as a 60-minute episode of a Doctor Who rather than a movie, because it's the subject matter it's tackling, the subject details. It's just so mundane that, there's no Daleks, there's no Cybermen, there's no Master. The villain is very low-key. Like, the villain's hardly in it. And it's mainly just showing us this world. And for that, I feel like the format of it being a one-parter fits it very well. So let's actually get into the story itself. The Doctor and Rose take Adam to the far future in the second bound and beautiful human empire. But something isn't right as they land on Satellite 5, a space station sending out all the news onto Earth. But something isn't quite right with the Doctor. He looks around and he can feel that something is wrong. Characters, the people in this world aren't speaking the way they should be. This is supposed to be a great time of great food and people who are just always polite. But yet, the people some of the characters that they like bump into, like background characters, bump into each other, they shout and they're pushing lines. The food is this fast food junk, a Krog burger, which, fun fact, that is actually a reference to a Doctor Who comic book, The Iron Legion, making the first connection from a comic book into the television series, before Big Finish would be established as canon in Night of the Doctor, even though Night of the Doctor chronologically takes place before this. But yeah, Kronburgers means that the Doctor Who comic books, or at least the Iron Legion and the Fourth Doctor Adventures, are canon in that sense. I always thought it was from a novel, but after looking it up, it's actually from a comic book. Anyway, so the characters kind of split as the Doctor and Rose are investigating what's happening, whilst Adam has come up with his own plan. After they witness this data process where this woman, she gets in her chair and she clicks her fingers and her head opens up like this, which is something we got to talk about, and a beam of pure data goes into her head, and her brain basically becomes a hard drive computer with just so much information, and gets spread across the news forecast and everything. It's just so much data, so much processing. We get to meet these two characters who live in this world. Can't remember the life of me of their names, but I will admit that they're just not interesting characters. One of them is just like this sweet, innocent, she kind of bumbles around everywhere. And this other woman, she is the leader of this group, and she kind of puts everyone down in the hope that she will get some sort of promotion to go to floor 500, which she's been told the walls are made of gold, and like she believes that the Doctor's this inspector, as the Doctor uses his psychic paper, as he's like a pretend he's from like management. That's how he gets a demonstration of this event, and Adam witnesses this and sees potential as he tricks Rose into letting him basically wander around the space station by himself, as he tries to access one of the computers and learn everything he can on computer chips. But after his access being denied, he has to go to basically a medical sector of the room and get an implant, to which this woman bribes him into having the head thing which the woman had earlier on. Now, I stated in my Dalek vlog that Adam in that story didn't bother me. Not that he was an interesting character, he was far from an interesting character, but in that story he was a harmless character in terms of writing structure. He was just sort of there. He plays his role as the young genius boy who helps Rose into these situations. He plays that role fine in Dalek. Here, however, he's basically the companion, and in a storyline which actually is never done before, and is actually on a premise very interesting. The idea of a companion who fails, the companion who couldn't be, as he basically uses the time travel aspect of the TARDIS and the show of Doctor Who to basically try and trick into the Doctor and Rose and all that into basically changing time to benefit himself. Which means that Adam gets a lot of screen time in this. And he's just such an annoying little brat. He starts off so, like, I just can't get a good read on him. One moment he's this, he's this sly genius, not genius, but he's a sly, manipulative character, a character who can trick Rose quite convincingly and as well, that, you know, that to give him the TARDIS key and let him roam around as he secretly plans on making a phone recording, as Rose gives him the phone which can send calls from when you left the TARDIS. Don't know how that technology works, but it was brought up in The End of Time, so there you go. But then on other moments, like when he's having the surgery, when he's being basically advertised the surgery, it's like he could either have the chip in the back of the neck or have this thing on his head. He becomes basically a submissive character, as this woman basically bribes him to get the more expensive, more bigger model, the one with the head chip. And the two interpretations of this character, as we see in this single story, just means that this character is such a hard read. You're constantly watching it, and you're just like, the Adam that we met 10 minutes ago wouldn't act like this. The Adam now feels completely different to the Adam who just left the TARDIS without any real boundaries. It seems like Adam is clearly there to get the plot through, and I mean, I think the idea of a companion who misbehaved is a great idea, and I would love to see another companion with this concept. But I think Adam was a fail in that attempt, because the character himself was so irritating and so just didn't deserve to get on the TARDIS to begin with. Yeah. Adam is just such an annoying brat, I'm telling you. Back on the Doctor and Rose's aspect, they start questioning people, as one of the characters, the really shy girl, suddenly gets a promotion and gets to go to floor 500, to which, just after she leaves, does the Doctor and Rose learn that when they get sent up there, they never come back. As the Doctor finds this very odd and peculiar, as the Doctor and Rose find this very odd. So they go and investigate, and Rose also keeps mentioning the whole heating, the floor, it's so warm in this room, and that's supposed to be like this little like build up to and a payoff at the conclusion of the story, but it just kind of comes off like Rose doesn't have anything to do. Let her be the one that brings up the whole "why is it so hot in here" aspect, and just let it play off like that. Which means Rose is I wouldn't say a one-dimensional character here, but she is very to the back line, and you could easily have forgotten that she was even in this story. The Ninth Doctor basically tries to like investigate anything, and he's the only one who knows that there is something wrong with time. Well, he tells Rose and Adam, but he's the one majority of the facts knows. I especially love scenes in which he's talking to characters, he's all cheerful and happy and in awe about all this science and this culture, but as soon as characters turn away, as soon as like Rose goes to meet up with Adam, and they go and have their own like little date, as the Doctor then just suddenly he stops smiling, he looks around seriously, and you know, you can see it in his face, he's on the case. He is here hell-bent on fixing what is wrong. which kind of leads into a great aspect. It leads into the topic of the villains, as there's two villains here. The main one is the editor, played by Simon Pegg. Now, it's also important to note that before watching this story, when I was a kid back in 2005, I had no idea who Simon Pegg was. And when I rewatched this years later, knowing who Simon Pegg was, blew my. I was like, what? That was Simon Pegg? What? Making him, after the Star Wars The Force Awakens, he makes him one of only two other actors who have appeared in Doctor Who, Star Wars, and Star Trek. He was also Scotty in the 2009 Star Trek movie, for those of you interested. The other actor being Deep Roy, if anyone's interested in that little fact. Now, Simon Pegg is usually known for his comedy roles. Obviously, you got Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, Paul, and he's just done so much comedy. That's where he thrives. And I've never seen him in anything in a serious role before. This is the first time I've seen him in a serious role before. And when I rewatched it, the second time I rewatched it, when I watched it, after I learned that he was such a big actor, I remember me and the people I was with was like, he can never be a serious actor. I cannot get out of my head Simon Pegg as Shaun from Shaun of the Dead. Liar! 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 Simon Pegg, despite having very little to do in terms of character or motivation, we'll have to talk about his motivation in a bit, he is scary as hell. He plays the character with this zany but also kind of collected personality, and these character traits bounce off with Simon Pegg's acting extraordinarily well. You can kind of feel here Brian Grant's Brian Grant's quirkiness from him directing Physical, that kind of cheesy, but for some reason that's the only silly in terms of directing that we get. Everything else is played completely straight-faced. It's kind of hilarious now knowing who directed this story. But anyway, Simon Pegg, he has these great parts where he's really quirky and stuff, but he's also calm and collective in a way as well, as just nothing really threatening, and he's always got this shit-eating grin, just smiling at everything. I especially love it when he finds out that the Doctor and Rose are no one, and he's just like, what does he say? You know what happens to non-entities? They get promoted. So now the character's motivation is something which is being criticised for. It turns out he's working not only for the second main villain of the story, but he is a representative of a line of banks. His motivation is money, of greed. Now, it turns out as well he's been manipulating the news to scare the economy from closing up the borders, not letting foreigners in, and the story also tackles the satire of fake news and misinformation, and how the news is edited and manipulated in a way for its viewing audience. A subject matter which might have been a silly idea when the story came out, because it was just a common fact. Yes, the news is always manipulative bullshit. But now, with the advent of fake news being a huge issue in recent years, especially during the Donald Trump presidency, this story is actually really relevant which is really scary. I always love it when stories years ago, it's like they were crap. The subject matter they're talking about really doesn't apply to us. And then years later, it's like more relevant than ever. It's very strange like that. But this is the fourth villain in a row in which the motivation is capitalism. You had Cassandra, you had the Slovene, you had, into a sense, Henry Van Staten, and now you have the editor, which is, it has become a little bit redundant. Not to say that a villain who's motivated by capitalism is bad. I mean, it is a serious issue which can lead to greed and selfless ambitions like that. But 4 villains in a row is a bit redundant and is a bit boring when compared to the other villains of the series. Now they build up like this creature when that woman comes in, and it's revealed that she isn't this awkward little young woman, but it's actually a soldier from a freedom fighter who has, she says she has evidence that proves that they are faking the news. However, apart from that, we never learn what this evidence is. So it's very strange. She quickly gets killed off way early in the story. I like the directing of this creature's point of view, and we see Simon Pegg, we're looking down at him, showing this creature is absolutely powerful, absolutely a menace. This creature being the mighty Jangrofest of the Hydro Haxel Jeffen Hedro, something like that, or Jeff for short. Yeah, and this is like a background villain. It's like it really only has a significant presence right at the very end, and it mainly talks in screeches. It doesn't have actually any English dialogue. It does seem to be talking as the editor can translate, but no other characters can hear it, can understand it. This thing was created purely by CGI, and I don't want to ditch the mill. They did some fantastic work in CGI in the revived series of Doctor Who, especially in season 1, with the ship crash landing in London, in Aliens of London, the Dalek, the CGI model of the Dalek in Dalek is some of the best effects that I've ever seen on a television series, and later down in the series they would have a lot of great CGI work. This story, however, has some of the worst effects in terms of CGI in the series. There's some really nice ones. There's a great shot with them looking down at Earth during its great and bountiful human empire. But the thing at the head, it's so badly cropped. It's so obvious that it's like it's a flat CGI image just posted onto somebody's head. It looks and feels horrible. And the Jangrofet itself, the thing on the ceiling, it's just an abomination of special effects. What the hell was that? So the Doctor and Rose goes up to investigate, and they get caught up. The editor's trying to get them to speak information, like who are they and stuff. When Adam links himself into the computer, and the editor now knows that the Doctor's a Time Lord and Rose is from the past, that must mean that the Doctor told Adam that he's a Time Lord, or at least Rose has, because how would he know about this information? And also he had the TARDIS key, so now the editor can now go back in time if he wanted to, change the course of human history so that any political stance that they want, they will have. It's incredibly sadistic of the villains. However, the leader woman from earlier, she actually breaks into floor 500 and basically realizes, right, her world, her reality is crumbling. The world isn't what she thought of. The human race is actually enslaved by this creature thanks to its access to the news. And she programs herself into the machine, changing the heating upwards, which kills the Jango Fett, and the Doctor and Rose goes downstairs to conclude the story and to deal with Adam. If there's one thing this story does absolutely right, it's the conclusion, in which actually it's just that one shot. And for those of you who've seen this story, you know what shot I'm on about. That bit where the Doctor is walking up to Adam, and the shot is just like a close-up of Christopher Eccleston's face as he's walking, with like this blank emotion on his face. And the way the camera kind of like shakes, and a handheld shot, it kind of feels like the Doctor's coming towards you, and you, being petrified, are like moving back out of his way. And that's kind of exactly what Adam feels in this very scene, as the Doctor takes him back to 2012 Earth, where he was last in Dalek. The Doctor destroys his phone, in which his house phone, which he was sending messages to learn about human chips of the future and all of this future information, and leaves him there with the thing in his head. We get this dialogue, which I really hate, where the Doctor's like, sorry, Adam, I only take the best. I've got Rose. Which, Rose up to this point, I didn't, that line, I mean, Christopher Eccleston plays it amazingly, but I don't think Rose deserves the best title yet. She has done some really selfish and stupid things in her run, and will continue to do so. With the story ending with Adam's mother coming in a really goofy and kind of ridiculous scene, in which his mother says something that's like, doesn't time fly just like that, which opens Adam's head thing, and it ends on Adam's mother's face like, really ridiculous. So that's the long game. Overall, it's got a lot of great ideas. The idea of Adam, of this companion who, first time he gets as a companion, he uses it for his own gain and tries to sneak like information, tries to trick the Doctor and Rose into like letting information out. I really like though it's done so much better in other stories. A great example, Vengeance on Varos, of the news and television manipulating its audience to think a particular way and act in a certain environment. But that element of this story actually holds up, because the stuff that we know now in our lives, in our reality, this element is actually really relevant. It's kind of sad that a Doctor Who story, which was criticised back for being so silly and stupid, was actually like really grounded. It just didn't know it yet. It was too good for its own. It was made 10 years too early, 20, 15 years too early. Yeah. But there's a lot of issues with it. Adam isn't an interesting character. The story runs at a snail pace, with our villains hardly getting any screen time. The majority of the plot is mainly just characters explaining this great and bountiful human empire, but we never get to see this world. It constantly feels like the story's teasing us with this, look how amazing, listen to how amazing this world is. It's world building in its own story. It's a bit ambitious for its own good, because you do get the feeling that the story was made on a cheaper budget, and that's why they can't show us this amazing empire, which constantly gets mentioned. But yeah, it's just kind of dull. It's kind of weak, and it's kind of a good episode to skip in a sense. It's one that we can easily avoid if you aren't interested in the plot synopsis, or it just didn't take your fancy. But there you go, that's the long game. So join me next time when Rose decides that she wants to go to a particular time in her own personal past, as we go to 1989 and we witness the death of Peter Tyler. Wow, that's really bad. So join me next time for Father's Day, and I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!